The sound of running water filled the kitchen, a steady stream cascading over the plates stacked in the sink. The scent of dish soap and leftover dinner lingered in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of coffee that still clung to the countertops. The evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that settled over the house when everything had slowed, when the world outside felt distant and unimportant. I hadn't expected him to still be here. My husband had gone upstairs a while ago, leaving his best friend lingering behind, finishing his drink, making small talk that stretched longer than it should have. I had barely thought about it until I felt it. The shift in the air. The weight of someone standing behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that I knew he was waiting for me to acknowledge him. I swallowed, my hands stilling under the stream of water. "You need something?" His voice was smooth, casual, but there was something else beneath it. Something heavier. Just watching. I let out a quiet breath, focusing on the dishes in front of me, on the way the water ran over my skin, grounding me. Didn't know watching someone wash dishes was so entertaining. A soft chuckle, low and knowing. "You make it look interesting." My fingers tightened slightly around the plate I was rinsing, my body suddenly too aware of the space between us, or rather, the lack of it. He was close, closer than he should have been, and yet I didn't move away. I could feel his presence like a whisper against my skin, the quiet hum of tension settling between us, thick and unspoken. My breath felt a little shallower, my pulse a little quicker, but I kept my voice even. "Shouldn't you be heading home?" A pause. Then, maybe. The word lingered, stretching between us, carrying something unspoken, something I wasn't sure I was ready to acknowledge. His voice was quieter when he spoke again, closer. "Do you want me to?" I swallowed hard, the warmth of the water now nothing compared to the heat creeping up my spine. The kitchen had never felt smaller, the air never quite this thick. His fingers ghosted along the counter beside me, slow, deliberate. Not touching, but near enough that I could feel the heat radiating from them. My breath caught, but I didn't move away. "You've been quiet tonight," he murmured, voice dipping lower. I forced myself to keep my movement steady, washing another plate, but I could feel the tremor in my fingers. "I didn't realize I needed to entertain you." He let out a quiet chuckle, deep and smooth. "You don't. You just do." His words sent a slow ripple through me, something undeniable curling in the space between us. My throat felt dry, my hands moving on autopilot now, but I could feel every shift in the air, every inch of space that wasn't really space at all. He was right there, watching, waiting. "Tell me to leave," he murmured, his breath warm against the shell of my ear now. I stiffened, my grip tightening around the dish in my hand. The words should have come easily. I should have said them without hesitation. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on me, the warmth of him just behind me making it impossible to think clearly. My heartbeat pounded in my chest, my breath coming just a little too fast. "You're still here," I finally said, barely above a whisper. His voice was just as quiet, just as controlled. "Yeah." I exhaled, my fingers resting on the counter now, my body betraying me, leaning just slightly, just enough that the space between us became almost non-existent. The awareness between us thickened, his presence no longer just lingering, it was pressing, deliberate, waiting for me to do something, say something, break whatever spell had fallen over the kitchen. But I didn't break it. I let it stretch, let the anticipation coil tighter between us, let the warmth of his breath against my neck sink deeper into my skin. And I realized something then, something dangerous, something inevitable. I didn't want him to leave. The silence between us stretched long and heavy, thick with something unspoken. The only sounds were the soft rush of water down the sink and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. My fingers rested on the counter, damp from the dishes, but my focus was elsewhere, on him, standing just behind me, close enough that I felt the warmth of his presence without him even touching me. The air had changed, heavier now, pressing against my skin like an unspoken challenge. "You still haven't told me to leave," he murmured, his voice quiet, but thick with meaning. I swallowed, my pulse quickening. Maybe I thought you'd get the hint. A soft chuckle, deep and knowing. If you really wanted me gone, you would have said it by now. He was right. I had every opportunity to break this moment, to step away, to remind us both of where the boundaries should have been. But I didn't. Instead, I let the seconds stretch between us, the air charged with something undeniable. I turned my head slightly, catching the way his eyes darkened, the way his lips parted just enough to make my breath hitch. There was something unspoken between us, something that had been lingering just beneath the surface for too long, waiting for a moment like this to rise to the surface. "What are we doing?" I whispered, though we both already knew the answer. His knuckles brushed against mine, slow and deliberate, the faintest contact, but it sent a ripple through me, tightening something low in my stomach. Something we shouldn't. I exhaled shakily, my body betraying me, leaning ever so slightly into the space between us. And yet, here we are. His other hand hovered near my waist, hesitant, but close enough that my skin tingled from the proximity. His fingers flexed, as if fighting the urge to close the distance entirely. The moment balanced on the edge, waiting for one of us to tip it over. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, voice low, controlled, but barely. I met his gaze, steady despite the fire burning inside me. "I won't." His restraint shattered. His grip tightened at my waist, pulling me just slightly, just enough to eliminate what little space was left between us. The heat of his body pressed against mine, his breath mixing with mine in the thick, silent anticipation of what we both knew was inevitable. His fingers traced up my arm, slow and deliberate, leaving a trail of heat in their wake. "We're not supposed to do this," he murmured, but the way his grip tightened said otherwise. "I know. Then why aren't we stopping?" I let my fingers slide up, curling slightly into the fabric of his shirt, grounding myself in the warmth of him. "Because we don't want to." His exhale was shaky, his hands gripping my waist more firmly now, no longer hesitating. The last sliver of space between us disappeared, the weight of the moment crashing over us, drowning out everything else. The water still ran in the sink, the clock still ticked on the wall, but none of it mattered anymore. The world outside this kitchen faded, dissolving into nothing but heat, breath, and the slow, inevitable pull between us. Because this was happening. And neither of us was stopping now.